All right, once again, very good evening to everybody. If you want to open your Bibles to Exodus, the book of Exodus, we are in Exodus chapter 25. Exodus chapter 25. We're now in I think this is now our third quarter of studying the book of Exodus. We should be able to finish the book this quarter, believe it or not, even though we're a little over halfway to the last, but we've been going verse by verse and looking at the various aspects of this book because there's so much that we can learn and apply from Exodus to apply to our own lives today as Christians. There's a lot of teaching that we see and principles and the nature of God that we learn by watching and reading what God says in this book of Exodus. And so we have now entered into the last segment of the book of Exodus. We started out in the first several chapters are when they're down in Egypt and God takes them out of Egypt. He then brings them here to the foot of Mount Sinai, and it's here now he's giving them these laws. And that's where we're at when he's explaining exactly what it is he wants and very specifically what he wants when it comes to his own worship. So, just to recap real quick, God has now pulled out the people from Egypt, the people of Israel, which are in the millions by number, and is creating a nation out of these people. And this is the beginning. For the next 40 years, they're going to be wandering in the wilderness. And before they do that, God lays out all the rules and laws at the very beginning, before they start this journey. And the journey is to lead them to the promised land. And as you move on through Leviticus, on into Numbers, you see that journey, you see more of what happens. And then you get into Deuteronomy, and he really starts to talk about the promise of them going into this land and what they can expect. And of course, there's other stories that go along with that, like the 12 spies that go in and look at it, and they come back, and of course, then they're condemned. A whole other generation rises up. So there's a lot more, obviously, is going to happen. But it all starts right here with God giving them these laws. Now, we talked about those laws and various different aspects of them and how they apply to us. And we're now getting into the tabernacle. The tabernacle is a place of worship. It is where God said he would come and dwell among his people. And that's what's special about the tabernacle, and that's what we need to take away from this, is that this is the creator of the universe who has chosen a people and has told them that I want you to make a special dwelling for me, and I will come down and I will dwell among you. Just sometimes I think we, as Richard likes to say, we overread the Bible sometimes, and we don't think about how serious that is and how important that is. Imagine if Jesus were to come to us and say, I want to live among you, and bought a house right here in Milton and lived among us. So this is how serious this is that the Lord, that the creator of the universe has come and is going to live with his people. But you're not going to do it just any old way. You're going to do it very specifically. I want to back up before we get to where we left off in chapter 25. I want to point out once again verse 8 and 9. All of this that we read in the next several chapters stems around these two verses. And you're going to see this verse repeated here in just a few moments. So in verse 8 of chapter 25, he says, And let them make me a sanctuary that I may dwell among them. According to all that I show you, that is the pattern of the tabernacle, and the pattern of all of its furnishings, just so you shall make it. And so that's what, again, this is all based upon, is then he goes, what's interesting is when you talk about a dwelling, when we talk about building something, if somebody were to walk up to you, Steve, I know you used to build houses, or Dane, I know you build houses, and they walk up to you and they want you to build a house. What is the first thing? What is the first thing you do? Where do you start building a house? Foundation, right? You start with the bottom. Okay, so if somebody shows up with a bunch of furniture, okay, here's the plans that I want you to build my house, okay, and here's my furniture, okay, and here's the windows, and here's the curtains and everything that goes on it. I see you're smiling pretty big there, Dane. You're thinking, that's not how this works, right? we have to have a foundation first, and then what? Walls, and then the roof, and then you start adding in all the other parts. Well, this is an important point. And we didn't draw out too much last week. Jack Davis and I were having some conversations afterwards, and this is a very important point. Notice that God doesn't start with the foundation. This picture that you see of the tabernacle, which we will explain more in just a moment, that's the whole compound. That's the dwelling itself. He doesn't start with the base. He doesn't start with the walls. He starts with the most holy object, the most important object of the tabernacle first. This is what is important. This is what God wants done first and how He wants it done. Isn't that interesting? So it would be like somebody come up to you wanting them to build a house and say, I've got this object, and I want you to build the whole house around this object. That actually happens sometimes, doesn't it? All right, so that's why when we get into verse 10, He makes the ark, and we talked about that last week and what the ark is and what it's made of and its purpose. And that led us up to verse 23. The next object, the next most holy object. So let me fast forward through these real quick. Again, we'll come back to these and explain it. So here we have in these chapters, these pieces of furniture, these objects. And here we talked about the Ark of the Covenant. And no, it's not that of Raiders of the Lost Ark. I found this. This is a replica of the Ark, and we talked about what's inside the Ark when we went over and looked in Leviticus. I'm drawing a blank now. But we looked at what's in Hebrews, and when it talks about what's in the Ark, and I thought it was interesting that this replica made sure. Now, they don't know what manna actually looks like, but hey, we'll put this little bowl of this corn-looking stuff in there. It's close enough, right? But at least we have an idea of what was in that ark. All right. Now, the next thing we come to is the table for the bread. All right. So let's read verse 23 through 30, and let's see what we can learn about this piece of furniture. As I mentioned, God is starting with the most holy object of the tabernacle and proceeding outward. We start from the bottom and build upward. God started upward and is building down, if that helps with putting that in your mind there. Okay, so the next thing, you shall also make a table of acacia wood. 2 cubits shall be its length, a cubit its width, a cubit and a half its height. And you shall overlay it with pure gold and make a molding of gold all around. You shall make it for a frame of a handbreadth all around, and you shall make gold molding for the frame all around. And you shall make for it 4 rings of gold, and put the rings on the 4 corners that are at its 4 legs. The rings shall be close to the frame as holders for poles to bear the table. And you shall make the poles of acacia wood, and overlay them with gold, that the table may be carried with them. You shall make its dishes, its pans, its pitchers, and its bowls for pouring. You shall make them of pure gold. And you shall set the showbread on the table before me always. All right. So this is this other piece of furniture, and much like the ark, notice that it's gold, so it is being overlaid and made out of very precious materials. But what's interesting is it also, like the ark, has these rings that are to be fabricated and attached to it so that these poles can be put through. Does anybody remember what the poles were for whenever you're considering the ark? It's for carrying it. Is that a serious rule or law of God, or is that just something that He wants? Why is it serious? Why do we know it's serious? Do not touch the ark. What? You'll die if you touch it. Remember, we went and looked at the story of Uzzah, who reached out to keep the ark from falling, and God struck him right there. That was several hundred years, 1,000 years later. And so God does not change. He is the same. Always. Here's just some more. We don't know what this actually looks like. You can only take an idea from this and see if these artists that render it, but imagine this table inside. We know it's approximate size because of knowing what a cubit is, but we don't know exactly what it looked like as far as its design or anything. It could have been very ornate, like what you see here, with its pitchers and its various utensils. Some people think that it even had perhaps this stack so that you could change out those 12 loaves of bread that are supposed to be on it. We'll talk about that in just a second. And others think that it was more like this. And so, just to give you an idea of what this table may look like. Now let's talk about a couple of things regarding this table, the purpose of this table. So if you keep your finger here, let's go to Leviticus chapter 24. Leviticus chapter 24 helps us to understand a little bit more about what's going on. Leviticus chapter 24. And if you look beginning in verse 5, here God is giving very specific details regarding worship. If you don't know about the book of Leviticus, it is the next book after Exodus. Here God's given all this information and details about the tabernacle and things like that. When you get into the book of Leviticus, he's now talking about how to use the tabernacle and what it's for and all the different ceremonies and procedures and different rules and laws that go with it. So here, beginning in verse 5, it says, "And you shall take fine flour and bake 12 cakes with it. 2/10 of an ephah shall be in each cake. You shall set them in 2 rows, 6 in a row, on the pure table before the Lord. And you shall put pure frankincense on each row, that it may be on the bread for a memorial, an offering made by fire to the Lord. Every Sabbath he shall set it in order before the Lord continually, being taken from the children of Israel by an everlasting covenant. And it shall be for Aaron and his sons, and they shall eat in a holy place, for it is the most holy to him from the offerings of the Lord made by fire, by a perpetual statute." Now, did you notice a couple of things in there? This table that God is commanding them to make, and very specific about, and then here later in Leviticus is now giving them specific commands of how to use that table. And one thing that stands out to me is that continually, it says, this bread is changed. How often? What was that? Every Sabbath. So every Saturday, this bread is being changed out. And who is the bread for? For the priests. Now, we've mentioned this a few times in various classes the last few weeks. Who are the priests today in the church? All of us. Christians. Everybody who is a Christian is a priest. Now, do you see the connection of what happens whenever you're looking at the book of Exodus? We go back to this table, this table it's called a table of showbread. Sometimes it's called the table of presence. You think about what it represents. There's those 12 loaves of bread representing the 12 tribes of Israel. And that reminds us, is a foreshadow, if you will, of what we do. A table that we gather around on the day of worship, and we partake of this bread. And who is allowed to partake of it? Not just anybody can partake of it. Well, anybody can, but it's not going to do them any good if they're not a Christian. And so the priests, us Christians, partake of this bread. It's very special. And so this helps you see why studying things like Exodus is so very important. Now, another thing, too, is it's interesting about this table, and to notice it's talking about going back to verse 29, the dishes and the pans and the pitchers. Go with me to 2 Kings chapter 25. 2 Kings chapter 25, and another interesting part of the story develops further down in history. Second Kings verse 25, beginning around verse 13. This is when Nebuchadnezzar has come and is destroying Jerusalem and carrying the Israelites off into captivity. Notice what happens in verse 13. The bronze pillars that were in the house of the Lord, and the carts and the bronze sea that were in the house of the Lord, the Chaldeans broke in pieces and carried their bronze to Babylon. They also took away, notice it, the pots, the shovels, the trimmers, the spoons, and all the bronze utensils with which the priests ministered. Isn't that interesting? So now, you need to also understand that all these things have moved into the temple. Here in Exodus, we're talking about the tabernacle, which is this tent. By the time we get to this era, this part of history, it's now in the temple, but still the same elements. You still have the table of showbread, you still have the utensils, and all that stuff was broken, destroyed, or carried off into captivity by Nebuchadnezzar. So this just kind of the way my mind works. Whenever I read the Bible, I start thinking, oh yeah, that reminds me of the story of what happens when Nebuchadnezzar comes and things like that. Okay, any questions or comments about this so far? Okay, if we continue reading, the next thing that we come to is this lampstand. And so again, we're inside the tabernacle, the things that are inside. You remember last week we talked about the ark. Where did the ark, where was it positioned? Where did they put the ark? In the what? The most holy. Let me see if I can back up here real quick and get to a picture of the... There we go. So there is the ark in that back part of the tabernacle, the most holy, the Holy of Holies. Okay? And that's where only the high priest could go in there. A normal priest, a regular priest, could not just walk in there. It was separated by a veil. We're going to get to the veil in just a moment. So if you consider that, and then the front part of the tabernacle is the holy place. This is where, as you can start to see now, this is where that table of showbread is. And now we come to the lampstand, and then next we'll look at the altar of incense. So let me fast forward one more time, back up to where we were. We get to the lampstand. All right, let's read that. You shall make a lampstand of pure gold. The lampstand shall be of hammered work. Its shaft, its branches, its bowls, its ornament knobs, its flower shall be of one piece, and 6 branches shall come out of its sides, 3 branches on the lampstand out of one side, 3 branches of the lampstand out of the other side. 3 bowls shall be made like almond blossoms on one branch with an ornamental knob and a flower. 3 bowls made like almond blossoms on the other branch with ornamental knob and a flower, and so for the 6 branches that come out of the lampstand. On the lampstand itself 4 bowls shall be made like almond blossoms, each with its ornamental knob and flower. And there shall be a knob under the first 2 branches of the same, a knob under the second 2 branches of the same, a knob under the first 2 branches of the same, according to the 6 branches that extend from the lampstand. Do you get the hint that God is specific about the way He wants this? See, we were, again, over-reading the Bible. Sometimes we read that, and I know I was reading it really fast there, but think about the detail that God is giving for this. 36, their knobs and their branches shall be of one piece. All of it shall be one hammered piece of pure gold. You shall make 7 lamps for it, and they shall arrange its lamps so that they give light in front of it. And its wick trimmers and their trays shall be of pure gold. It shall be made of talent of pure gold with all these utensils and what I just said about being specific. I still can't say that word. Being specific, look at what he says in verse 40. Do you recognize this verse? And see to it that you make them according to the pattern which was shown you on the mountain. That's why we read that a minute ago, backing up to verse 9 in chapter 25. There it is again. So in the beginning, when he said, I want you to build me a tabernacle according to the pattern. Then he starts with the most holy object of all of the tabernacle, the second most holy, and the third most holy, and then he repeats that command. Make it exactly the way I want it. Have you ever done that? Have you ever hired a contractor or somebody and said, whatever it is you're doing, and say, I want this, I want it like this, and I want it like that, and I want it a little bit this way, and I want it this color, and I want it. Have you ever done that? Are you upset if they don't do exactly what you say? I get very upset. In fact, I write it down. I say, sometimes somebody will say, oh, I got it, no problem, I got it. I was like, no. I want you to write it down, or I'm going to write it down for you, because I want to know that you saw every single thing that I want, and I want it very detailed. God is writing it down. He's telling Moses, write this down. Because here in a little bit, you're going to see when he gives it to the workers that this is how you are to make it. There's no questioning. There's no bending. There's no room for opinion on this. This is how God wants it. Do it that way. Now, real quickly, this word lampstand, the lampstand of pure gold, is a Hebrew word. All of this was translated from Hebrew into English. The Hebrew word for lampstand is, does anybody know? What? Menorah, which has become a symbol of the Jewish religion. When you think about that image with those 7 branches like that, that has become an image of the Jewish religion even to this day. And we're not told specifically the meaning of the lampstand other than the fact that it is to give off light. There's no symbolic meaning that's mentioned in the Bible, although you could look in Revelation chapter 4, verse 5, where you have that imagery of heaven, and you can see where he talks about the 7 spirits of God, so perhaps that's what it is. But Exodus does not tell us. Nowhere else in the Pentateuch does it tell us exactly the meaning of this table, of this lampstand. But it's very intricate and provided light. When you think about this darkness inside, or this tent, there's not a whole lot of light perhaps in there, so that's what it would provide, God being the light. Again, this intricacy. Now, what's interesting about the lampstand and also the table of showbread, I mentioned to you a minute ago how Nebuchadnezzar carried away all of the utensils. Well, there is the Ark of Titus in Rome that has this carving in it, and you can see something that looks very familiar there. The lampstand. That's because in AD 70, whenever they sacked Jerusalem, whenever they destroyed Jerusalem, this is showing whenever Titus came back, that triumph of that. And here you can see they brought back those items from the temple. And this was made back around that time. So it's kind of interesting that we have this depiction of at least a good idea of what it looked like just from this carving. Isn't that interesting? That the things that God's talking about right here wind up being verified in history and other parts of archaeology. Any other questions or comments on this before we move on? Yes. Right. So, kind of like with the Ark of the Covenant, we don't exactly know what it looks like. It talks about those wings of the cherubim touching each other. And a lot of times you'll see the wings doing this. Well, it could be that the wings touched here, but then were opened here where it made a seat. It could be the wing, one wing touched here and one wing down here. We don't know exactly. Same way with the lampstand. We have a general idea. We have that depiction in the Ark of Titus, but very well so could be that the bowl was shaped so that it reflected into the room on one side. So that's a good observation. God would be proud of you observing detail. That's what we want here. Okay, so he goes with these most holy objects, and of course the next object in the room as far as furniture is the altar of incense. But notice God doesn't go to that next. What do we go to next? The curtains. And so let's see what he has to say about this. Moreover, you shall make the tabernacle with 10 curtains woven of fine linen, thread blue and purple and scarlet yarn, with artistic designs of cherubim you shall weave them. Now, my version, the New King James, says this fine linen thread, blue and purple and scarlet yarn. Do you have anything different in your version? Material. You have the word material. Anybody else have something different? Thread. So that's exactly what you're going to see. You're going to see thread, you're going to see material, you're going to see yarn. Now, those of you who do have a New King James, is the word yarn italicized different than the other words? Yes or no? Thread is. Okay, thread is italicized. Material is in yours, and yarn is in this one. There's an interesting thing about translation that happens. Sometimes there are words that we have in English that they don't have in Hebrew. There are words in Hebrew that they have that we don't have in English. And sometimes you have to supply a word for it to make sense. But that sometimes can require making a judgment call of what are they talking about. So whenever they translated this, the thread was there, the fine linen part, and then the blue and the purple and the scarlet. And then there's a word there that can be, that's why it's rendered sometimes material, thread, or yarn. And so the translators have to pick. Therefore, that's why it is in italics, because they had to make a judgment call. We don't exactly know what it was specifically. Obviously, it's some type of cloth or thread or something, material that they made these out of. But you'll see that over and over and over. For example, when we get down to mine says goat's hair, and there's another one that says badger skins. Again, all italicized. Okay. Yes. Yes. How about that? Now, that gives testimony to another thing that I want you to notice as we're reading this, is that these materials, when we think about today, you know, we want to make a curtain or whatever, we run down to where? Joann's Fabrics or something like that. Aren't you impressed I even knew that name? Hey, we could just run down there and go buy some fabric, you know, but it wasn't that easy, and especially out in the middle of the desert. You think about where they're at. They're at the base of a mountain. They just came from being slaves in Egypt, and now here they are with this task of having to build these things. Now, not only are they having to build these things and make these, but these are very high quality, scarce, and expensive materials. God is not saying, just go down there and get, you know, the bargain bin fabric. He's saying, I want the best of the best of the best. And you see that over and over and over, especially when you get into Leviticus, the book of Leviticus. He wants unblemished, the first, and absolutely perfect. And what was his son? Unblemished, absolutely perfect, and everything, right? So he is all in all. So again, this is type and shadow that you're seeing in the Old Testament. All right, so he continues. Says, the length of the curtain shall be 28 cubits, the width of the curtain 4 cubits. Every one of the curtains shall have the same measurements. 5 curtains shall be coupled to one another. The other 5 curtains shall be coupled to one another. You shall make loops of blue yarn on the edge of the curtain of the selvage on one set, and likewise do on the outer edge of the other curtain of the second set. 50 loops you shall make on one curtain. 50 loops you shall make on the edge of the curtain that is on the end of the second set, and the loops so that the loops may be clasped to one another. And you shall make 50 clasps of gold and couple the curtains together with the clasps so that they may be of one tabernacle. You shall also make a curtain of goat's hair to be a tent over the tabernacle. You shall make 11 curtains. The length of each curtain shall be 30 cubits, the width 4 cubits. 11 curtains shall all have the same measurements, and you shall couple 5 curtains by themselves, 6 curtains by themselves, and you shall double over the 6th curtain for the forefront of the tent. You shall make 50 loops on the edge of the curtain that is outermost in one set, 50 loops on the edge of the curtain of the second set. You shall make 50 bronze clasps, put the clasp into the loops, and couple the tent together that it may be one. The remnants that remains of the curtain of the tent, the half curtain that remains, shall hang over the back of the tabernacle, and a cubit on one side and a cubit on the other side of what remains of the length of the curtain of the tent shall hang over the sides of the tabernacle on its side and on that side to cover it. You shall also make a covering of ram skins, dyed red for the tent, and a covering of badger skins above that. Okay, again, getting into translation, what we're talking about is like, wow, these animals and stuff like that, and talking about goat's hair. Again, this is translation problems here of trying to figure out exactly what we're talking about. We don't know perfectly what it is. Now, we know goat, that word in Hebrew, but what do they mean by goat's hair? The point being is that, again, every time we read these type of things, I want you to say to yourself, wow, God is specific. God is specific, but he's also practical. Notice he says 2 sets of curtains that fold over. You think about this huge tent. And remember, this is all designed to be portable. This is a portable sanctuary, portable place. I got to back all these up to get to this picture here. You can see there the different curtains that he's talking about, and the coverings and things like that. And all this has to be transported. I love this picture right here. It kind of gives you a good idea of what's going on. So it's a lot easier to take this huge fabric and put it in half and fold it over. That's why it's coupled together and things like that. So God is not only very specific about it, but he's practical in knowing that we've got to carry this. In fact, I was looking at the picture, and of all the things that the Israelites had to carry, the only thing that I would not want to be on that particular team is the bronze altar. That's like the biggest, heaviest thing of them all. Give me anything else, I'll carry it. But that big bronze altar would be rough. But this is the same thing with these fabrics. So I hope you can see the idea of what's going on. These are beautiful fabrics, and it's the coverings. And he's going to get into the next segment, the boards, beginning in verse 15, that you can kind of see in these pictures of how it's covered over here. Let me just give you a few more kind of visuals. Again, artist rendering, we don't know exactly what it looks like. But here you can see these boards that are going to be made, and then they lay these covers over. Now notice this one is kind of a square look to it. You back up a couple here, and it looks, they make it this way. We don't know. It could be either one. Point being is, notice that God is so specific that here he tells them exactly what type of skin to use. This one particular word here that I have says badger skin is actually, it might be seal skin, some say ram skin, some say porpoise skin. Where is an Israelite going to get a porpoise in the middle of the desert? But what it is it's a waterproof skin. That's the type of material, as God's saying, that last one that you're going to put on the top is going to be waterproof. The other ones have these different colors, the different types to make it beautiful inside, but even down to the point of like utility, waterproof, so that it will withstand the elements. The other thing, too, that's interesting is that, again, a lot of the different models that show, it presumes that this thing might be opened up like this, the square look that goes to it. Again, we don't know, and this artist rendering here has green. I don't remember seeing green anywhere in the colors that Paul was just pointing out to us there. So hopefully this gives you a little bit better idea. Just notice the layers also. This also provides the quietness, the solitude, and things like that would be inside. Any questions about this? Okay. Real quick, I'm just going to go real fast over the boards. We literally have just like 1 minute left. So then the boards, beginning in verse 15. And for the tabernacle you shall make the boards of acacia wood standing upright. He then goes into the 2 cubits, making 2 tenons, as well as they shall be, look in verse 24. They shall be coupled together at the bottom, and they shall be coupled together at the top by 1 ring. Thus it shall be for both of them. Then he goes through and he says, they have these sockets in them. You overlay them with gold, verse 29. And then verse 30. Notice verse 30 again. And you shall raise up the tabernacle according to what? Its pattern, its blueprint, the form, the model that I've given you, which were shown to you on the mountain. Now, again, you can look at all these things, and we need to be careful. A lot of times people want to put a lot of symbolism and things like that into all these elements of the tabernacle. Oh, the lampstand means this, and the showbread means it. I did just a minute ago talking about the Lord's Supper. I think that's a pretty obvious one when we see type and shadow. But then you get into things like every single element, every single material of the tabernacle, people want to make some type of connection or some type of spiritual meaning. And so this part right here, when it says that they were coupled together, well, we Christians are coupled together through Jesus Christ. Well, that's true. We are, but you're starting to kind of reach a little bit in that department. And you need to not try to put or force something that the Bible doesn't say anything about. And not once do we see anywhere in the Bible, for example, in the book of Hebrews, and just like the boards that were coupled together, so are we as Christians. You see what I'm saying? The Bible doesn't do that, so let's not do that. Let's be careful. It's okay to think things like that, but we got to be careful teaching stuff like that. Pointing east. Now, I have yet to be able to find it. I had this. I wrote it down in my notes when I taught this in Spanish, and I can't find my source, but I'm still looking for it. But I read sometime that the reason God wanted it pointed to the east is because the Israelites just came out of Egypt, where the Egyptians, the maximum god was Ra, the god of the sun. And so this tabernacle is God's presence on earth, and when the sun went down, God's giving his back to him, like, you are not as good as me. And whenever you rise up, you're looking me in the face. And so I thought that was interesting. Again, that's reading stuff into it and knowing a little bit about the culture, but I thought that is an interesting point that it is faced to the east. Okay, thank you so much for your attention, and we'll see you Sunday.